Two couples never made it to their prom night in 1987. Brandon Hayes, Derek Stone, Jessica Liu, and Megan Foster disappeared without a trace on April 25th, leaving behind only an abandoned car and questions that would haunt their families for decades. What hunters discovered in a limestone cave in 2017 would reopen the case and reveal evidence that shouldn't exist. The limestone cave entrance sat hidden behind a cluster of rhododendron bushes, invisible from Miller's Point overlook, 40 feet above. Tommy Brennan and his nephew had been tracking a wounded deer through the October woods when they noticed the opening. Their flashlights illuminated a narrow tunnel that descended at a sharp angle into the earth. The cave system beneath Miller's Point was extensive, with passages that connected to natural springs throughout the county. Local cavers knew about it, but few explored the deeper chambers. 30 feet below ground, wedged between two limestone formations, lay a perfectly preserved prom corsage. White roses with baby's breath, the blue ribbon still crisp after 3 decades underground. The flowers had dried to the color of old bone, but showed no signs of decay or deterioration. The preservation was remarkable, as if the cave's constant 50-degree temperature and humidity had frozen the corsage in time. Beside it sat a set of car keys that defied explanation. The metal surface was unmarked by 30 years in the cave, and the key fob bore the Honda logo with a model number that didn't exist in 1987. Tommy called the sheriff's department from his truck at 3:47 p.m. Deputy Martinez arrived within 20 minutes, followed by Detective Ray Hutchinson, who had worked the original case as a rookie patrol officer 30 years earlier. The forensics team rappelled into the cave system that afternoon, mapping the passages with GPS equipment and photographing every surface. They found additional evidence deeper in the limestone maze, a fragment of blue fabric that would later be matched to Jessica Liu's prom dress, a cufflink from a rental tuxedo, and something that made no sense at all. A Polaroid photograph lay face down in the cave mud, 50 feet from the entrance. The image showed 4 teenagers standing in front of a house nobody recognized. They appeared older than high school age, perhaps in their early 20s. The photo was dated 1991, 4 years after the teenagers had vanished. The handwriting on the back read, "New Beginning" in blue ink that would later be matched to samples from Derek Stone's school notebooks. The implications were staggering. If the teenagers had survived their disappearance, where had they been for 4 years? If they had died in 1987, who had taken this photograph and why was it buried in a cave? April 25, 1987 had been unseasonably warm for eastern Kentucky, with temperatures reaching 73 degrees by afternoon. Brandon Hayes spent the morning at Millfield Hardware, earning extra money for prom expenses. His time card showed he clocked in at 7:15 a.m. and worked until 2:30 p.m., earning $18 for 7 hours of work. His manager, Carl Winters, would later tell investigators that Brandon seemed excited about the evening, talking about the photographs he planned to take and the dinner reservations he had made at Romano's Italian restaurant. Brandon had worked 3 weeks of overtime shifts to afford the formal wear and evening expenses. The tuxedo rental cost $35 from Formal Affair on Main Street. The shop's records showed Brandon had been measured on April 10th and picked up the tuxedo on April 24th at 4:15 p.m. The receipt, found in his bedroom after his disappearance, listed black tuxedo, white shirt, blue bow tie, and black patent leather shoes. He had also purchased a matching boutonniere for $3. Jessica Liu prepared for prom in her bedroom on Maple Street, carefully applying makeup while her mother pressed the pale blue dress they had purchased at Penny's department store. The dress had cost $63, a significant expense for the Liu family. Jessica had saved babysitting money for 4 months to buy it, earning $2 per hour watching the Henderson children 3 nights a week. Her bank account showed a balance of $78 on April 24th, money she planned to use for prom pictures and dinner. The Liu family had immigrated from Taiwan in 1979 when Jessica was 6 years old. Robert Liu worked 2 jobs to support his family, managing the hardware department at Sears during the day and cleaning offices at night. Jessica was an honor student with a 3.8 GPA, planning to attend Eastern Kentucky University in the fall to study business administration. She had already been accepted and was scheduled to receive a partial academic scholarship worth $1,500 per year. Derek Stone spent the afternoon detailing his father's burgundy Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, a 1984 model with 47,000 miles on the odometer. The car had been purchased new by Derek's father, who worked as a supervisor at the local coal preparation plant. Derek had driven the vehicle twice before for special occasions, both times under strict instructions to return it in perfect condition. The car's maintenance records were meticulous, with oil changes every 3,000 miles and regular tune-ups at Morrison's garage on Route 15. The Oldsmobile had passed its annual safety inspection on April 1st, with no violations noted. The tires were relatively new, with less than 8,000 miles of wear. The gas tank was filled at a Chevron station on Main Street at 5:45 p.m. on April 25th, with Derek paying $8.73 for 6.2 gallons of regular unleaded gasoline. The receipt was found in the car's ashtray after the vehicle was discovered at Miller's Point. Megan Foster had spent 2 hours preparing for the evening, curling her auburn hair and selecting jewelry to match her burgundy dress. The dress had been purchased at a boutique in Lexington during a special shopping trip with her mother in March. The total cost was $97, including alterations to adjust the hem and neckline. Megan worked part-time at the public library, earning minimum wage to save money for college expenses. The corsage had been ordered from Fletcher's florist downtown on April 15th and paid for in cash by Derek Stone. The florist's receipt showed an order for white roses with baby's breath and a blue ribbon to match Jessica's dress. The cost was $12, and the corsage was picked up at 4:30 p.m. on April 25th. The florist, Martha Fletcher, would later tell investigators that Derek seemed nervous when he collected the corsage, asking twice if it would stay fresh throughout the evening. The plan was simple and had been discussed in detail among the 4 teenagers. Derek would collect Megan at 6:30 p.m., then drive to Jessica's house on Maple Street to pick up the second couple by 7 p.m. From there, they would take the scenic route along Harper's Ridge Road to Riverside Country Club, stopping at Miller's Point for photographs before the 8 o'clock dance. The total drive time was estimated at 45 minutes, allowing plenty of time for pictures and arrival at the venue. Patricia Foster watched from her kitchen window as the burgundy Oldsmobile pulled into the driveway at exactly 6:30 p.m. She had been tracking the time carefully, wanting to take photographs of the couple before they left. Derek stepped out wearing a black tuxedo with a blue bow tie, his hair freshly cut and styled with mousse. Megan emerged from the house at 6:35 p.m., her burgundy dress rustling as she walked to the car. The dress had been altered to the perfect length, reaching just below her knees. Patricia took 3 photographs of the couple beside the vehicle using a Kodak Instamatic camera loaded with color film. The first photo showed them standing formally beside the car's front door. The second captured them in a more relaxed pose, with Derek's arm around Megan's waist. The third showed them laughing at something Derek had said about his bow tie being crooked. These photographs would become crucial evidence in the investigation, providing the last known images of 2 of the missing teenagers. The Oldsmobile left the Foster driveway at 6:45 p.m. Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door, noted the time because she was expecting a phone call from her sister in Louisville at 7 o'clock. She observed the car turn right onto Harrison Street, heading toward the center of town. The weather was clear with no wind, perfect conditions for driving and outdoor photography. Robert Liu waited on his front porch as the car arrived at Jessica's house at 7 p.m. He had prepared his camera equipment and positioned himself to capture the best angles in the fading daylight. The sun was setting behind the hills to the west, creating golden light that would be ideal for portraits. Robert owned both a Polaroid instant camera and a 35mm Canon, planning to use both for different types of photographs. The four teenagers posed beside the burgundy sedan for approximately 10 minutes while Robert took pictures. The boys adjusted their bow ties and smoothed their hair, while the girls checked their makeup and arranged their dresses. Jessica's corsage was clearly visible on her left wrist, the white roses bright against the blue fabric of her dress. The teenagers appeared relaxed and excited, laughing and joking as they prepared for their special evening. Robert took 6 photographs with the Canon camera and 4 with the Polaroid. The final image showed all 4 teenagers standing close together, their arms around each other's shoulders in a friendship pose. Derek was grinning broadly, his bow tie slightly askew. Megan stood beside him with a radiant smile, her auburn hair catching the golden light. Brandon had his arm around Jessica, who was looking up at him with obvious affection. The photograph captured a moment of pure happiness and anticipation. The Oldsmobile departed from the Liu residence at 7:15 p.m. Mrs. Henderson, who lived across the street, observed the car turn left onto Harper's Ridge Road. She noted the time because she was expecting her own daughter to call at 7:30 p.m. from college. The teenagers were never seen alive again by anyone who knew them. The car would be found 3 hours later at Miller's Point, empty and locked, with no sign of its 4 occupants. Riverside Country Club's prom coordinator, Helen Walsh, noticed the absence of Derek and Megan at 8:15 p.m. when their names were called for the prom court ceremony. The couple had been selected by their classmates to represent the junior class, and their failure to appear was unusual. Walsh contacted the school chaperones, Mrs. Davidson and Mr. Peters, who attempted to reach the teenagers' parents by telephone from the country club's office. The first call was made to Patricia Foster at 8:30 p.m. When Derek and Megan didn't answer at home, the chaperones tried the Foster residence. Patricia was confused by the call, assuming her daughter was already at the dance. She agreed to drive to the country club to investigate, making the 20-minute trip in increasing darkness. When she arrived at 9:10 p.m. and confirmed that Derek and Megan were not present, real concern began to set in among the adults. Robert Liu received a call at 8:45 p.m. from Helen Walsh, who had obtained his number from the school's emergency contact list. Liu was also puzzled, as he had watched his daughter leave for the dance nearly 2 hours earlier. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes, but by its end, both adults understood that something was wrong. Liu immediately called Patricia Foster, and they agreed to search the route to the country club while the chaperones continued trying to contact the teenagers. By 9 p.m., both fathers were driving the winding curves of Harper's Ridge Road, their headlights sweeping through the darkness. The road was narrow and dangerous, with steep drop-offs on one side and dense forest on the other. Several scenic overlooks provided parking areas for sightseers, but most were empty on the cool April evening. The temperature had dropped to 58 degrees, and a light fog was beginning to form in the valleys. Robert Liu drove slowly and methodically, checking each overlook and pull-off area along the route. The road had several sharp curves that required careful navigation, especially in darkness. At Miller's Point, the most popular scenic overlook, his headlights illuminated something that made his heart sink. The burgundy Oldsmobile sat in the gravel parking area, positioned between 2 faded white lines, as if deliberately parked. Liu approached the vehicle cautiously, calling out the teenagers' names as he walked across the gravel. The car was locked, with no keys visible inside. The windows were slightly fogged, but he could see that the interior appeared undisturbed. He cupped his hands against the driver's side window and peered inside, noting that the radio was off and the gear shift was in park position. The teenager's formal clothing was nowhere to be seen. The initial inspection revealed details that would puzzle investigators for decades. The teenager's street clothes remained neatly folded in the trunk, as if they had changed into their formal wear at this location, rather than at home. Megan's purse sat on the back seat, containing her driver's license, $12 in cash, a tube of Revlon lipstick, and a small, compact mirror. Brandon's wallet was in the glove compartment, with $23 and his student ID card untouched. The car's gas gauge showed 3/4 full, consistent with the fill-up earlier that evening. The engine oil was clean, and the battery showed no signs of weakness. There were no mechanical problems that would have forced the teenagers to abandon the vehicle. The doors were locked, but the windows were rolled down slightly, approximately 2 inches. This detail would later prove significant, as it suggested the teenagers had been in the car long enough to feel the need for ventilation. Sheriff's Deputy Martinez arrived at Miller's Point at 10:15 p.m., followed within minutes by Detective Ray Hutchinson and the county's crime scene technician, Barbara Cole. The overlook was immediately cordoned off with yellow tape, and portable floodlights were set up to illuminate the area. The investigators began a systematic examination of the scene, photographing the vehicle and surrounding area from every angle. The overlook sat on a limestone bluff 40 feet above Kettle Creek, where the water moved dark and slow between moss-covered rocks. The drop was steep and potentially fatal, leading investigators to consider the possibility that the teenagers had fallen or jumped. The wooden safety railing along the overlook's edge showed signs of wear and weather damage, with one section noticeably loose. However, there was no physical evidence of recent damage or disturbance. The crime scene yielded minimal physical evidence despite extensive searching. The gravel surface around the car showed tire tracks consistent with the Oldsmobile's tires, but no other vehicle impressions were detected. The soft earth beyond the gravel revealed no clear footprints, though the ground had been disturbed by the parents' earlier searches. Investigators used plaster to make casts of several partial impressions, but none could be definitively linked to the missing teenagers. Bloodhounds were brought to the scene at midnight, but the dogs were unable to pick up a scent trail beyond the immediate vicinity of the car. The teenagers' scent appeared to end at the vehicle, suggesting either that they had not walked away from the location or that environmental factors had eliminated their trail. The dogs showed interest in an area near the loose section of railing, but found no specific evidence of human presence. Detective Hutchinson expanded the search at dawn on April 26th, requesting assistance from neighboring counties and the Kentucky State Police. The limestone terrain surrounding Miller's Point was treacherous, with numerous caves, sinkholes, and underground streams that could conceal evidence or bodies. The geology of the area had been shaped by millions of years of water erosion, creating a landscape that was both beautiful and dangerous. Dive teams from Louisville arrived to search Kettle Creek, focusing on the pools directly below the overlook. The water was cold and murky, with visibility limited to less than 3 feet in most areas. The divers worked systematically, feeling along the creek bottom for any objects that might provide clues. They found debris from decades of careless visitors, beer cans, fishing equipment, and various pieces of trash, but nothing connected to the missing teenagers. The ground search expanded to cover a 5-mile radius around Miller's Point, with teams of volunteers joining law enforcement officers in combing the dense forest. The terrain was challenging, with steep hillsides covered in thick underbrush and rocky outcroppings that could hide evidence. Search dogs were used throughout the effort, but the limestone geology interfered with scent tracking, and the dogs frequently lost trails at cave entrances or underground streams. Witness interviews began immediately, but revealed frustrating inconsistencies that would plague the investigation. A gas station clerk on Route 34, approximately 3 miles from Miller's Point, reported seeing 4 teenagers in formal wear at his station around 7:30 p.m. The teenagers had not purchased anything, but had used the restroom and asked for directions to Riverside Country Club. However, the station's security camera had malfunctioned earlier that day, and no video evidence supported the clerk's account. The timing of this sighting was problematic. If accurate, it meant the teenagers had stopped at the gas station before reaching Miller's Point, adding an unexplained delay to their journey. The station was not on the direct route to the country club, requiring a deliberate detour of several miles. Investigators could find no reason why the teenagers would have made this stop, as they had already received clear directions to their destination. A farmer named Willis Garrett claimed he heard voices calling for help around midnight on April 25th, approximately 3 hours after the teenagers were last seen. The sound seemed to come from the direction of Thompson's Ridge, which was 3 miles northeast of Miller's Point. Garrett was known in the community as a reliable witness with excellent hearing, but the timeline and location of his report didn't match the known facts of the case. Several other witnesses reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles in the area on the night of the disappearance. A truck driver on Route 15 observed a white van parked at a rest area around 8:45 p.m., with 2 men standing beside it who seemed to be waiting for something. A woman driving home from her job at the hospital noticed a dark-colored car following her for several miles before turning off onto a side road. These reports were investigated, but never corroborated or connected it to the missing teenagers. The investigation consumed thousands of hours and exhausted the county's limited resources within the first month. Detective Hutchinson worked 18-hour days, following every lead and interviewing anyone who might have information about the case. The state police provided additional manpower and technical expertise, but the investigation was hampered by the rural location and limited physical evidence. The forensic analysis of the Oldsmobile revealed no signs of struggle or violence. The interior was clean and undisturbed, with no blood, hair, or fiber evidence that might indicate what had happened to the occupants. The teenagers' fingerprints were found throughout the vehicle, but no unidentified prints were discovered. The lack of physical evidence suggested either that the teenagers had left the car voluntarily or that any signs of struggle had been carefully cleaned up. The formal wear that the teenagers had been wearing was never found, despite extensive searches of the area around Miller's Point. The street clothes found in the trunk were examined for any clues about what might have happened. The clothing showed no signs of damage or unusual wear, and appeared to have been folded carefully rather than hastily discarded. This detail suggested that the teenagers had time to change clothes in a controlled environment, rather than being forced to disrobe under duress. The case attracted media attention throughout Kentucky and neighboring states, with television crews conducting interviews and newspaper reporters investigating every angle of the story. The photograph of the 4 teenagers beside the burgundy Oldsmobile became iconic, appearing on missing person flyers and milk cartons throughout the region. The image captured the innocence and excitement of prom night, making the teenagers' disappearance all the more tragic and mysterious. Years passed without significant progress in the investigation. The case file grew to over 200 pages as investigators pursued every possible lead, but none produced evidence that could explain what had happened to the 4 teenagers. The parents aged visibly under the strain of uncertainty, their hope gradually fading, but never completely extinguished. They continued to mark anniversaries and birthdays, keeping their children's rooms preserved exactly as they had been left. Patricia Foster drove to Miller's Point every year on April 25th, leaving flowers by the section of railing where she imagined her daughter might have stood for the last time. The ritual provided some comfort, though the questions never stopped haunting her. She replaced the loose railing section at her own expense, installing a small memorial plaque that read, in memory of 4 young lives. The plaque remained in place for 15 years before vandals removed it. Robert Liu kept Jessica's bedroom exactly as she had left it, changing only the calendar on her desk each January. Her prom preparation items remained scattered on the dresser: lipstick, mascara, and hair clips arranged as they had been on April 25, 1987. The pale blue dress hung in her closet, still wrapped in plastic from the dry cleaners, though it had never been worn to the dance. Liu would sometimes stand in the doorway of the room, trying to understand what had happened to his daughter. The case was officially classified as a cold case in 1992, though it was never formally closed. New detectives occasionally reviewed the file when they joined the department, but fresh leads were rare and usually unproductive. The physical evidence was stored in the county's evidence room, taking up 3 large boxes that were examined periodically, but yielded no new insights. The Oldsmobile was eventually sold at auction, the proceeds donated to a scholarship fund established in the teenagers' names. The discovery in the cave 30 years later forced investigators to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the case. The Polaroid photograph was the most significant piece of evidence found since the original investigation, but it raised more questions than it answered. If the teenagers had survived their disappearance, how had they obtained new identities and transportation? If they had died in 1987, who had taken the photograph, and why was it hidden in the cave? The house in the photograph was identified through painstaking analysis of architectural details and geographical features. The structure was located in a subdivision called Desert Vista, built in 1989 near the outskirts of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Property records showed the house had been owned by a series of renters and buyers over the years, with no apparent connection to the missing teenagers. The current residents had no knowledge of the previous occupants or any involvement in the Kentucky case. Federal investigators were called in to expand the search beyond Kentucky's borders for the first time in 30 years. The FBI's missing persons database was searched for any records of Derek Stone, Megan Foster, Brandon Hayes, and Jessica Liu, but no matches were found. Social Security Administration records showed no activity for any of the 4 teenagers after April 1987, suggesting either that they had died shortly after their disappearance or had obtained new identities through illegal means. The cave system where the evidence was found became the focus of intense investigation. Geological surveys revealed that the limestone formations were part of a larger network that extended for miles underground, with connections to springs and streams throughout the county. Some passages were large enough for people to walk through, while others required crawling through narrow spaces barely wide enough for a human body. Advanced forensic techniques were applied to all evidence found in the cave. DNA analysis of the fabric fragment confirmed it came from Jessica Liu's prom dress, while the cufflink was traced to the rental shop where Derek had obtained his tuxedo. The corsage was examined for fingerprints and DNA, but 30 years in the cave environment had degraded most biological evidence. However, pollen analysis revealed that the flowers had been picked from plants that grew only in specific areas of eastern Kentucky. The Honda keys presented the most puzzling aspect of the cave discovery. The keys were traced to a 2003 Civic that had been registered to a woman named Carol Martinez in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Martinez had no connection to the missing teenagers and no knowledge of how her keys had ended up in a Kentucky cave. The keys had been reported lost in 2015, 2 years before the cave discovery, suggesting that someone had found them and deliberately placed them in the cave as a clue. Ground-penetrating radar was used to search for additional evidence throughout the cave system. The technology revealed several anomalies in the limestone floors that might indicate buried objects, but excavation of these areas produced only natural geological formations. Metal detectors were also used extensively, but found only modern debris left by spelunkers and tourists over the decades. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Detective Hutchinson received a phone call from a woman named Lisa Brennan in Portland, Oregon. Brennan claimed to be Derek Stone's cousin and said she had information about the case that she had kept secret for 30 years. She agreed to meet with investigators and provide documentation that would change the entire understanding of what had happened on prom night. Brennan's story began with a letter she had received from Derek Stone in August 1991, postmarked from Albuquerque, New Mexico. The letter contained a detailed confession that explained the teenager's disappearance and their subsequent years in hiding. According to Derek's account, he had been drinking before prom night and had consumed several beers while getting ready at home. His parents were out of town, and he had access to their liquor cabinet. The letter described how Derek had been driving under the influence when he struck and killed a pedestrian on Harper's Ridge Road around 7:45 p.m. The victim was identified as Thomas Hartwell, a 53-year-old maintenance worker who had been walking home from his job at the county road department. Hartwell's shift had ended at 7:30 p.m., and he regularly walked the 3-mile route to his house rather than wait for his wife to pick him up. The teenagers had panicked after the accident, realizing that Derek would face serious criminal charges for driving under the influence and vehicular homicide. Instead of calling for help or reporting the accident, they had made the devastating decision to dispose of Hartwell's body and flee the area. The letter described how they had loaded the body into the trunk of the Oldsmobile and driven to a remote area of the Daniel Boone National Forest. After burying Hartwell's body in a location marked on a hand-drawn map included with the letter, the teenagers had driven to Miller's Point to discuss their options. They realized that returning home would eventually lead to their arrest and prosecution, so they decided to fake their own deaths and start new lives elsewhere. Derek's older brother had connections to people who could provide false identification and transportation, though the letter was vague about specific details. The teenagers had changed into their street clothes at Miller's Point and hiked through the forest to a predetermined meeting location 3 miles away. A van was waiting to transport them to Louisville, where they boarded a bus to New Mexico using fake identification documents. The letter described their early years in hiding as difficult and frightening, working cash jobs and constantly moving to avoid detection. By 1991, when Derek wrote the letter, all 4 teenagers had established new identities and were living relatively normal lives in Albuquerque. Derek and Megan had married, as had Brandon and Jessica, though they used different names and had no legal documentation of their Kentucky origins. Derek expressed remorse for their actions, but also relief that they had escaped prosecution for what he characterized as a tragic accident. The letter included specific details that only someone with intimate knowledge of the case could have known. Derek described the contents of Megan's purse, the amount of money in Brandon's wallet, and the exact time they had left each house on prom night. He also mentioned that they had stopped at a gas station on Route 34 to ask for directions, confirming the clerk's report that had never been corroborated. Lisa Brennan explained that she had kept the letter secret for 26 years because she was afraid of the legal implications for her cousin and the other teenagers. She had moved to Oregon in 1993 and had minimal contact with her extended family, making it easier to avoid questions about Derek's whereabouts. The discovery of evidence in the cave had prompted her to finally come forward with information that might help solve the case. The letter's map led investigators to a remote area of the Daniel Boone National Forest, approximately 15 miles from Miller's Point. The location was accessible by an old logging road that had been abandoned in the 1970s. Ground-penetrating radar detected an anomaly in the soil consistent with a buried body, and excavation began immediately under careful archaeological supervision. The remains of Thomas Hartwell were found exactly where Derek's map indicated, still wearing the work clothes described in the letter. Dental records confirmed the identification, solving a missing person case that had been largely overlooked due to the attention focused on the 4 teenagers. Hartwell had been reported missing on April 26, 1987, but police had assumed he had left town voluntarily due to marital problems. The condition of Hartwell's remains provided evidence supporting Derek's account of the accident. The victim had suffered severe trauma to his legs and pelvis, consistent with being struck by a vehicle. However, the skull showed additional injuries that suggested he might have survived the initial impact and been killed by subsequent blows. This detail raised questions about whether Hartwell's death had been entirely accidental. Federal investigators used the information in Derek's letter to locate the 4 teenagers in Oregon, where they had been living under assumed names for 30 years. Derek Stone was now known as David Sorensen and worked as a construction foreman. Megan Foster had become Maria Fernandez and was employed as a dental assistant. Brandon Hayes had taken the name Brian Hoffman and managed a small auto repair shop. Jessica Liu was living as Jennifer Lopez and taught elementary school. All 4 were arrested simultaneously on October 15, 2017, and charged with vehicular homicide, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. The arrests made national news, with media outlets comparing the case to other long unsolved disappearances. The teenagers' decision to fake their own deaths and successfully hide for 30 years was unprecedented in law enforcement experience. During interrogation, the 4 suspects provided consistent accounts of the events on prom night, though some details differed from Derek's letter. They admitted to the hit-and-run accident but claimed that Hartwell had died instantly and that they had not intentionally killed him. The decision to dispose of the body and flee had been made in panic, they said, without consideration of the long-term consequences. Derek Stone, now 50 years old, admitted to planting the evidence in the cave during a clandestine visit to Kentucky in August 2016. He had been diagnosed with terminal cancer and wanted to reveal the truth before his death, but couldn't bring himself to confess directly to authorities. The elaborate scheme involving the cave was his attempt to provide closure for the families while maintaining some distance from direct confession. The Honda keys had been obtained during Derek's 2016 visit when he had rented a car in Lexington using his false identity. He had kept the keys as a souvenir and decided to include them with the other planted evidence to make the discovery more mysterious and likely to attract attention. The keys belonged to the rental car agency's fleet, and Carol Martinez had simply been the last person to rent that particular vehicle. However, significant questions remained about the teenager's story. The timing of certain events didn't match witness accounts, and some physical evidence seemed inconsistent with their version of events. Medical examination of Hartwell's remains suggested that his injuries were more severe than would be expected from a simple hit-and-run accident. The skull fractures appeared to have been caused by multiple impacts, raising the possibility of deliberate violence. The case was further complicated when Derek Stone suffered a fatal heart attack during his 3rd day of interrogation. His final words to Detective Hutchinson were, "There's more you don't know," but he died before providing additional details. The remaining 3 suspects maintained their story, despite intensive questioning, but investigators suspected that significant details were still being concealed. The cave system beneath Miller's Point was thoroughly searched again, but no additional evidence was found. Geological analysis revealed that the cave had been used by humans for centuries, with Native American artifacts dating back over 1,000 years, discovered in deeper chambers. The cave's constant temperature and humidity made it an ideal location for preserving organic materials, explaining why the corsage had remained intact for 30 years. The case was officially closed with the arrests of the 3 surviving suspects, but Detective Hutchinson remained convinced that important aspects of the truth had not been revealed. The teenagers' ability to obtain false identities and transportation suggested connections to criminal networks that were never fully investigated. The sophisticated planning required to successfully disappear for 30 years seemed beyond the capabilities of panicked high school students. Thomas Hartwell's family finally received closure after 30 years of uncertainty about his fate. His widow, who had remarried and moved to Florida, returned to Kentucky for his funeral. She expressed gratitude that the truth had finally been revealed, but also anger that she had been denied the opportunity to mourn properly for 3 decades. Hartwell was buried in the Millfield Cemetery, with a headstone that read, "Finally home." The families of the 4 teenagers struggled to process the revelation that their children had been alive for 30 years while they had grieved their deaths. Patricia Foster visited her daughter in prison, but found it difficult to reconcile the middle-aged woman with the 17-year-old girl she remembered. The reunion was emotional, but strained, with decades of separation creating an unbridgeable gulf between them. But the most haunting question remained unanswered, echoing through the limestone chambers where the truth had been hidden for so long. If Derek Stone had wanted to reveal the truth about Thomas Hartwell's death, why had he waited 29 years to plant the evidence? What had changed in 2016 that made him risk exposure after successfully hiding for 3 decades? And what did he mean when he said there was more they didn't know?